Okay, hello everybody. This is your host, Joe Firestone. Okay, and our elections expert, Ezra Wilson,
Hello.
is here with me this evening. We may be seeing Lisa too, but I don't know. She was in all kinds of difficulties today. So if she can make it, I'm sure she will, but she may not. Didn't sound too hopeful when last I spoke to her. Okay, anyway, what we're here to talk about. Okay, well, first, of course, we're continuing the Dump the Incumbents program that we started at the KRTD Media. And so that, okay, is going on here with the Empowering Democracy series. And so we're going to have, I think, quite a few shows now within the Empowering Democracy series that deals with the same material that we were dealing with in the Dump the Incumbents show. We're changing the name a little bit. Here it's called Dump the Corruption because we didn't want to use the same name we were using, okay, at KRTD, but we're still focusing on the role of money in politics and ways to get money out of politics through the actions of citizens themselves, just by exposing the money and trying to get citizens to act in a collective way to punish candidates for taking the big money. So that's still the orientation, the overall orientation. Uh, for these weeks that are left, though, until the election, of course, the big news is how the various races around the country are going and what the general pattern is. The mainstream news is saying, of course, that it looks like the Democrats uh, are in a pretty good spot for the Senate and may hold on to the Senate. But they're saying more and more that the House looks like a Republican House. Uh, that tends to be supported by the generic polls. There are many people who think that if a particular party has a generic advantage, if Democratic Party, for example, has a generic advantage of 3 points, okay, in the generic ballot, that's too little for them to win the House. There's, I think, something of a consensus on the idea that Democrats have to be ahead by 7 points to make up for the gerrymandering and the voter suppression that goes on. Uh, I don't know whether 7 points, okay, is accurate, or really much of a rule of thumb, but it's somewhere in that particular neighborhood, where the Democrats have to have a lead. So the fact that the polls have been tightening up over the last, let's say, month and a half or so, is not a good look for the Democrats to have the House. So, Ezra, what do you think about this kind of construct of where the elections are going?
I would mostly agree with that. So, right, Democrats need to be, I think maybe it's closer to 5%, right, polling to really sort of solidify their chances against Republicans in the national environment. And that is, as you mentioned, right, gerrymandering, fundraising, the fact that they don't have the incumbency right now. You kind of want to try and do a little, like, you need a little more generic ballot support usually because there's tends to be more anti-presidential momentum, sort of things like that. Um, but yeah, overall, Democrats' leads is sort of shrinking in many areas, with the exception of the fact that a lot of Republicans have sort of gotten themselves into troubled water over the past couple weeks, and that's sort of putting Democrats in better advantage. So obviously, the Herschel Walker story was pretty big. as just like I think the polling has shown like a 2% increase or so in Warnock's favor since all that came out. And then we think about other important candidates. I know Alan Fong has taken it. The Rhode Island 2nd Congressional District is now sort of tilting more to the Republicans. But there's some questions about hit and run he was involved with that he has stayed silent on. And so there's, a lot of Republican candidates, Oz with a million different things, have sort of gotten a lot of scandal. So I think that that's sort of working out in favor of Democrats as well. Just a side note that I think has been really important this past week is just sort of something. Yeah.
So you think this last week has been very good for Democrats?
I think this last week has, I think it depends, right? I could be wrong on this, but generic polling and most polls are sort of showing Democrats reclining a bit in their support, right? Or at least in their net support, which isn't a great sign for Democrats, right? But the race is where it really matters. So if you're not just looking at the national average, it does seem to be that Democrats are doing a bit better certainly in certain areas. There are races that are races you wouldn't expect for Democrats to either be competitive in that are showing some repetition in terms of competitiveness, or the race that I mentioned in Rhode Island where the opposite is true, right? And you wouldn't really be expecting a Republican to win a congressional district in Rhode Island, but it's happening, or it's increasingly looking like it might happen, right?
Okay, so let me ask some specific questions. First, in the Warnock Herschel Walker contest.
Mm-hmm.
From what I've seen, Herschel Walker sounds like he would be really, really incompetent as a congressman.
Mm-hmm.
Why has he been so tough for Warnock to beat?
So I think I don't necessarily. Yeah, I mean, I think Walker's not the greatest candidate, right? Certainly. Even before the past couple of weeks, he's had a lot of fumbles in the campaign. He hasn't had the strongest messaging. The thing is that it is a swing state, right? Warnock sort of went into this cycle with a few of his own scandals that weren't really that successful in the previous election, but did sort of seem to be getting a bit more attention now that he was an incumbent senator. Fundraising, Democrats were fundraising for other potentially more vulnerable incumbents, certainly as the election cycle has gone on, with Nevada being a really competitive district and other races that I think Democrats had to defend more than they were hoping. And so I think for a while there, Warnock probably wasn't getting as many resources. And, it was things like that. Republicans were putting a lot into the race, right? They didn't want Georgia to slip back into the Democrats. They had an important governor race. They want to make sure that they could keep the House and the Senate in the state, right? To make sure Democrats couldn't undo any gerrymandering or anything like that, right? And so it was a pretty important race, I think, overall. And so I think there were just a lot of factors that uplifted Walker from being a really bad candidate into having a somewhat successful campaign early on. But yeah, he certainly in the same way, Blake Masters sort of fell out of favor in the Arizona Senate race. I think we're sort of seeing Herschel Walker do the same.
So you think there's enough time for Warnock to overtake him and to go ahead?
Warnock's already a couple points ahead on the average now, and that's actually gone up a couple points over the past couple of weeks. So the beginning of October, right, Warnock had about a 2% lead in the polls. Now I think 548 shows him at a 4% lead in the polls, and that's over 2 weeks. And I really don't expect that to change that much. I could end up being wrong about that, but if more comes out, I think it's just going to end up hurting Walker. I don't really think there's much. Doesn't seem like there's much opposition research on Warnock that already didn't come out early in the election cycle or in last election. And just
what explains the fact, I think it's a fact, that the Warnock agenda the Warnock issues seem on the surface to be so much superior to Walker's. I hesitate to even say his issues because uh, he doesn't seem to have any
Yeah.
issues.
I mean, well, right. I mean, Warnock is a senator already. He has 2 years of experience running for Senate. He has more background in politics and activism. Um, he's just
Right, but from the standpoint of the Georgia voters,
well, well,
is there something wrong with his record?
well, with Warnock's, no, not really. I think it's just he's new. I higher association with Biden probably. Um, Georgia was a state Biden narrowly won. And so I think, right now, probably if an election were held today with a strong enough Republican, Joe Biden wouldn't win given his favorables. And so there's probably some, in the same way, anti-Trump vote is what really drove Democrats out in 2018 and gave Democrats such a huge wave. I think that sort of similar resentment towards the presidency, or sort of a way to try and keep the president in check, is sort of what we're seeing in Georgia, and that people don't want Democrats to have as much power. I think that's really the only thing I can think of as being that much of a driving force for Herschel Walker, beyond GOP media and spending and fear mongering about critical race theory and education and all of that stuff.
But somehow it doesn't seem like it's obvious to people that Herschel Walker is just a cipher.
I mean, I think it's increasingly becoming like, I think people are increasingly becoming aware of that, and we're seeing that in the polling. Right, this is the lowest Walker's I think ever polled in this race, or one of the lowest points, and I don't expect it to get that much higher for him. I think it's just because a lot of the time you don't see as much spending before now, so people aren't as familiar with the candidates or
Yes.
what plays the candidates as well. And so a lot of people are just like, that's a Republican. I want a Republican in this office, either to check the president or because I'm a Republican and I believe that this party holds my values, sort of thing.
Okay, jumping now to Wisconsin and Ron Johnson and Mandela Barnes.
Mm-hmm.
How would you look, at that race? Okay, and how would you explain that Johnson, after being such an awful and terrible senator, has been able to hang in there rather strongly?
Yeah, I think there were issues. The Democrats had a very contentious primary or certainly early primary season, right? And Mandela Barnes was probably the last major candidate to enter, and he entered a bit later than most of the other major candidates, and then sort of just got in there and pretty much became the nominee. And so there was probably some resentment, a lot of attack ads, or maybe not attack ads, but attacking from other candidates, the less progressive candidates, that were really trying to stop him from being the candidate. And so I think that's certainly a part of it, right? More contentious primary can usually hurt the party that had the more contentious primary rate. And Ron Johnson, he's won re-election 2 other years. I mean, he has a base of support in Wisconsin, even though he's awful.
Where does the support come from? Even though he's awful, you said he's awful.
I mean, at the same time, Wisconsin is incredibly like a swing state, so maybe a lot of voters in Wisconsin.
They're a swing state now, but
well, yeah, but
how did that? How did they get that way? For years and years and years, they were a progressive state.
Yeah.
And a sure Democratic state. So what's happened in the last 6 years?
A lot of moving out in certain regions. There's certainly a decent amount of demographic changes in Wisconsin, or just the Rust Belt as a whole, as more progressive regions become less populous. Some of them, although some become more, right? People leave. I would say that's probably a big part of it, or just the same shifts we see in Ohio and Minnesota, or more so in Michigan. It's probably a better example. Just the Democratic Party has poor outreach, right? 2016, Hillary Clinton visited it like just a couple times, right?
Poor outreach, you didn't go.
Yeah. Yeah, I wasn't even sure she went. Yeah.
Okay, let's move to Pennsylvania then.
Yeah, I mean, Pennsylvania certainly the highlight for Dems, I think, other than maybe Arizona and the fact that they sort of did really well all of a sudden in that state. But I'm sorry, I'm really tired today. Um, Pennsylvania, though, right? Oz had his own in the same way Herschel Walker just his campaign bombed last week. Oz's kind of did too. He had that whole article that was originally disproven about how he and his team of researchers or whatever um, ended up testing on hundreds or thousands of
dogs.
Yeah, of dogs and rats and
dog.
rabbits and cats, and how a lot of them died. And I think that came out and it's sort of plaguing him. He's just an unlikable, out of touch guy. I think Fetterman's got very strong outreach. And then, with Fetterman's stroke, right? The response from Dr. Oz and just the Republicans and conservative media has been incredibly vile and ableist. And I think that that's sort of speaking to a lot of people right now. I see a lot of people sort of talking about this race that otherwise aren't, sort of seeing it as, right, this is a way to demonstrate to people that, like, just because you have a disability or speech impediments or because you need cue cards for long political events or things like that, right? That doesn't mean you are a weak candidate or you're the worst candidate. And there's a sort of sense of arrogance out of Dr. Oz's campaign. In addition to the fact I think Democrats and certainly progressives are mobilizing a lot better in Pennsylvania than they are in other swing states. And Fetterman's just a much more, I think, likable, everyday guy than most Democratic swing state candidates who are sort of these repeat neoliberal, out of touch like figures. And if anyone is that in this race, it's sort of Oz, who's this rich multimillionaire from out of state who doesn't connect to the people of Pennsylvania.
He's kind of like a like a limousine type of liberal. Even though he's a conservative, he has the same kind of image, as a limousine liberal. It's not a likable image. So, it seems like there's still a 6-point lead for Fetterman in that race.
Yeah, and I mean that it sort of keeps bouncing back. I know, like, there was a dip in the polls for Fetterman. I think it's going to keep going up again, though. I think Arizona, Georgia, and Pennsylvania are just going to get better for Democrats. Hopefully, still a month out, still a lot can happen. But certainly more and more of those races seem like they're going to lean likely Democrat status, and they're probably going to stay that way.
Okay, so I did want to go to Arizona, and ask you about that.
I honestly, Arizona's been the one Senate race, other than maybe Nevada, that I haven't kept as much attention on, and that's just because there wasn't that much. The Republican primary for governor and for Senate were pretty contentious on certain levels, very ideological clash. The candidates were pretty much all awful and problematic and sort of made other factions of the party dislike them, right? And Blake Masters is a fairly problematic candidate just on account of what he says and the ads he has. Mark Kelly is a fairly well-liked astronaut over the past decade, and his wife was a very prominent, notable member of Congress who has a pretty tragic story, but they're both really well connected to Arizona and sort of represent the state. And overall, I just think they have a stronger message than Blake Masters, who some just came out of the blue, young, strong conservative, strong as in he's very conservative, not as in he's a strong candidate. I think he's pretty weak as a candidate. The fact that he's never run for office, I want to say, kind of shows in the way he is, and the fact that a lot of Republicans have even called his ads or his statements problematic at different points. It's kind of...
How much of a lead does Mark Kelly have right now?
6 points, the same as Fetterman right now.
Oh, boy,
Yeah,
I didn't
he was
realize
actually, I think he was behind Fetterman for quite a bit, right? It was like a 2 to 4 point, and it's gotten a little better. I'm trying to, if I pull up the 538 average, right? Um, yeah, beginning of August. Oh, beginning of October. I mean, it was a 6 point lead on 538. Huh.
Oh,
Yeah.
wow. So that's pretty substantial.
Yeah, he's
At
had
this
pretty.
point, it's pretty substantial.
Yeah, and I don't really see much happening, right, to change that. I mean, yeah.
We have about what 3.5 weeks left now.
Yeah, close to that.
Okay. Uh, what I've been puzzled by a little is the position of Masto. Okay, in the Nevada race.
Yeah, I think that that's the only real concern for Democrats going forward in the Senate is Nevada as a whole, being that there are three really important House races. Granted, those House races are sort of leaning back to Democrats a bit more, certainly two of them are, which I think is a good sign, especially for Mastos. But yeah, I mean, at this point, most people sort of agree that Republicans are more favored. The Republican candidate, rather, is more favored in that race.
The Republican
Despite
candidate.
the fact that she's pretty far right, and honestly, I don't see as much appeal for her. She's also not the most like strategic in her messaging or in her policy conversations or things like that. Um, but
A question about the party. The party infrastructure, okay, and machinery has now shifted left, right? Okay, it was
Well,
taken
yeah.
over.
So the last party election, so last year, a socialist slate of candidates came in, following Bernie's success in the Nevada caucuses, right? And they swept the state party. In response, the party machine backed out of the state. They pulled their money out of the treasury. Basically, left the Nevada Democratic Party broke, um, and it certainly has had less of the national party getting involved in fundraising for them. Been a lot more grassroots than you would probably see in an average Democratic Party. Um, and yeah, it seems to lack the resources relative to what you'd want in a swing state. And I think even though the fact that the federal candidates are fairly conservative or moderate sort of establishment is probably a better word to describe them. I think that perhaps, I don't know, some party infrastructure issues exist in Nevada that's making it really hard for Democrats to do well. And it could also just be a lack of investment in the last few election cycles, right? Clinton and Biden both had pretty poor numbers there. It was kind of a shock to everyone when Biden won by as little as he did in Nevada. And then the right sort of really honed in on Nevada and Arizona as two states that there's so much election fraud and well, yeah, they did the same with Wisconsin and Pennsylvania. But I think that those were certainly areas that the GOP is investing more in, and perhaps the Democrats aren't really investing that much in, and that's why.
But with respect to Nevada, the views and the platform, okay, of Masto, uh, really have a rather large gap, but compared to what the party mainstream in that state would like to do.
Yeah, that's true. And at the same time, Mastos doesn't seem like she's the most like if you look at all the swing state Democratic candidates, even ones like Tim Ryan that are sort of your moderate platitude candidates, they all have a platform. You all kind of know what all of them are running for. And Mastos, or just in Nevada as a whole, it seems like there's some inconsistent messaging on Democrats' parts. And yeah, a big part of that could just be that there's the party imbalance where the people in office are still much more moderate than the party infrastructure that is filled with very left wing members. Um, yeah.
So uh, could she still get more popular if she started to run on what the party platform is now, instead of trying to run on what the leadership of the party nationally wants her to run on.
Yeah, and I will say this: I don't know how much the actual official like policies have changed in the Democratic Party in Nevada, just because sometimes these things can take certainly more than just a year. But yeah, she's certainly out of touch with your average Nevada Democrat, I would say, right? Very overwhelmingly Bernie state, one of the most progressive Democratic parties in the country.
Right. So they're not happy to come out and work for her because she
Yeah,
doesn't.
exactly. I think a big issue with her is just a lack of momentum, probably, in the fact that she's not an exciting candidate. She's not new, right? She's an incumbent, which can sometimes be additional sort of bounce, right? You're incumbent, you have people that like you, they know you. But if you're not a new candidate, you're not offering anything new, your policy positions aren't that great, and you're at a time in a state that's becoming younger, becoming much more radically left wing, and you just
So
don't match that.
she is basically blowing the race because she will not change.
I mean, I think that that's certainly a part of it. Yeah, I think funding is also a part of that. But I think certainly if she had a rebranded campaign that was more progressive, we could probably see something that was a bit better. And even in like I want to say this is the race I have followed the least, so I could be a little off on this, but right before this past month, my understanding was Mastos had stronger messaging, right? Because Democrats were realizing that they were starting to lose the Nevada race. They were putting more into the race, and her margin started growing. And she was sitting at a 3-6 or 3-4, maybe 2-4 margin in Arizona or in August and September. I can't talk today. And then again, it just seemed like the messaging wasn't as strong, right? I don't know, sort of where the energy went, but there wasn't as much funding. There just wasn't as much like, I don't know, nobody really talks about this race as much as they were for a while there. And there doesn't seem to be much momentum for her, whereas Laxalt is one of the GOP's biggest candidates this year. There seems to be
Yes, and of course,
for him.
He has a very famous name in that state.
Mm-hmm.
His father, I believe, was the governor of the state for some time.
He was he was governor. He was also a senator.
He was also the senator as well. Yes.
Yeah.
The Laxalt name is a famous one, okay, in the state, widely known among the older people.
Mm-hmm.
And so he comes in, starts to run, and there's a kind of a natural attraction towards him because they were pretty satisfied with his father for some time.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so he's got that. They probably don't really consider him a Trumpist, right?
I mean, he ran Trump's campaign in 2020 in Nevada. So he was and in the way his campaign started was by being the very big, it calmed down, but right, he was the 2020 election was rigged. It was unfair for Donald Trump. Trump won Nevada. Trump won these other states. And that was sort of his branding when he first came out. And he put himself as the more right-wing candidate in the primary. So I don't know. I think it's calmed down a bit, but his messaging is still the Democratic Party's too woke, too radical. They're all the weird fear mongering that Republicans are sort of doing. I think he's certainly probably the Senate candidate that's most successfully running on that message.
Okay, so if these close races continue to trend in the way they are now, then what does that mean for the Democratic margin in the Senate?
Overall, I don't think the margin really changes that much. I think Democrats pick up Pennsylvania, but they lose Nevada, how it stands now.
Nevada, yeah.
Yeah, right. I don't think they're going to pick up Ohio, despite what everyone says. I don't think they're going to pick up North Carolina. Those two races can change, especially if Democrats stop investing in useless races like Florida, which I think, to their credit, they are starting to do now.
They're starting not to invest in Val Demings.
I'm not seeing as much. I don't know the fundraising numbers, but if I recall correctly, there's some movement to actually stop putting money into Iowa and Florida and focus more on these races where there's actually competitive races to be had.
How is Val Demings doing?
Val Demings is doing. Marco Rubio's had like a 5 to 10 point lead this entire election cycle in polling, and if you take the fact that Democrats are usually underestimated in polling, she's going to lose. She's going to lose by a lot, and it's kind of been that way the entire election.
Okay.
And she keeps trying to run as a conservative cop, right? Because she used to be her husband's a sheriff. She used to be commissioner or something along those lines.
She was a chief of police, I think.
Yeah, there you go.
Which is probably the same, as commissioner in other places.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay, and the other state you talked about. Okay, you talked about Ohio.
Mm-hmm.
And Iowa also.
Yeah, Iowa. Well, there's at least a credible argument for why Ohio could be competitive and might need investing in. I don't think there is in Iowa, right? Right. The incumbent has been in there for like a third of Iowa's history. He's pretty popular. Democrats have tried a lot harder than this election cycle to try and beat him, and they've never really won. A lot of the races haven't gotten that close relative to other races of that year. And the candidate there is all right, but nothing in polling indicates that it's going to be a close race. And if the Democrats don't have close to or a polling or a net positive in a state at this point, you probably don't want to be wasting money there anyway.
Okay. In that state, the Democratic candidate isn't a Sanders type candidate, is he?
No, but he's not the most establishment. He kind of was, but they were promoting the former Congresswoman. I'm forgetting which one. It wasn't Cindy Axne. She's still running. I forget which one. And she had a bunch of issues. And this other guy came out. He was a bit more appealable to people. He had a bit more energy and everything like that, more fundraising. So people were really starting to like the guy. But after the primary happened, I don't know, it kind of just faded away. He's not a progressive, right? He's not a Bernie type of Democrat.
Right. Okay, so basically the opportunity to get rid of the Iowa senator, Chuck Grassley, okay, is gone now.
I think it was kind of gone this whole election cycle. I think a lot of people early in the cycle were saying Iowa was going to be competitive. I think it's going to be a bit more competitive than people might have thought at the beginning. Because I'm forgetting his name, but he is the Democrat is a decent enough candidate, and the national environment is good enough for Democrats to do well with sort of everything going on with abortions and democracy and everything. But yeah, it's not a race that I think Democrats should be investing in, and it's not a race that I think they really are, which is probably good overall for them.
So you mentioned also, of course, Ohio, okay, and North Carolina. You don't think the Democrats can win in Ohio?
I don't think they're going to win in either of the two states, especially North Carolina. Although I guess the polling is starting to trend better for Beasley. I haven't actually really seen that. I just kind of see people saying that she's doing a lot better. But yeah, Tim Ryan and Sherry Beasley are okay candidates, surprisingly better than I thought originally. But I really don't think the races are like how they're going to be. If you're going to be a Democrat and you want to win Ohio, you can't poll even. You can't even pull a few digits ahead, right? Wasn't Biden for quite a while polling better than Trump in Ohio, and then he lost.
Yes, and then it disappeared.
Yeah, and even up to election day, a lot of the models had Biden winning Ohio or Trump narrowly winning Ohio, and it turned out to be much more stronger for Trump. And the same thing happened, obviously, with well, with Iowa, it wasn't nearly as close to North Carolina, but still Trump
Yes, yes.
and the Republican senator both had stronger leads, right, than people had thought. And like, yeah, I think that Democrats should be in a position where they look like they're doing really well before you even think that they're going to start winning these races. And right now, Sherry Beasley's pulling several points behind, and Tim Ryan is anywhere from pulling a few points ahead to pulling a few points behind. And I don't think Vance is that great of a candidate, but I think Ohio's not really that blue of a state anymore. And Democrats trying to invest in it after sort of abandoning it a bit, I don't think it's going to be successful for them. But
So your forecast at this point is that when all is said and done, it's still going to be 50-50 in the Senate.
Yeah, 51 maybe if Mastos wins. Certainly Mandela Barnes can bounce back. Certainly we could see something happen with JD Vance, who I wouldn't be surprised if something like with what happened with Oz or Walker happens to him and it puts Tim Ryan in a better advantage. Tim Ryan did have a pretty good ad that went out. That this time wasn't racist. He had some problematic previous ads. And so certainly the environment can change in those three races. But yeah, overall, I'd probably say the House or the Senate stays the same. I don't really see Democrats losing the Senate anymore, and I think a lot of models and polls are starting to reflect that. But certainly it can tie out still.
Right. Okay. And if it ties out, then the politics of the Senate pretty well stay the same.
Yeah, pretty much. At the same time, though,
being Sinema and Manchin.
yeah. At the same time, though, if the right money goes into Nevada, right, Democrats gain a seat and they have Fetterman, who is a much stronger candidate than most of the incumbents. I think that adds some credibility. I think Walker or Warnock being able to run again, running very much. He had an ad that was actually really good that came out yesterday, I want to say, that was all about promoting student loan forgiveness. And so he's certainly progressive on certain issues. So having, having Fetterman and having Warnock, and if Mandela Barnes is able to sort of turn around Wisconsin, then certainly I think that sort of moves the Democratic Party in the Senate to the left a little bit, which isn't, a couple seats isn't that much in the Senate, but at the same time, relative to the fact that we have maybe 5 senators who ever really vote on a progressive policy.
Okay, so I have another question in the context we're talking about. Okay, the Republicans have already started to threaten Social Security. They're quite open about it.
Yeah.
Okay. Why can't it make a big difference to the Democratic senatorial candidates? Okay, if they run on that, if they run against the Republicans on that, okay, in the closing days. In other words,
Yeah.
Security means a lot to people, and they're coming right out and saying they're going to go after Social Security and use a debt ceiling crisis to do it.
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly been an issue for a long time, and certainly in contemporary politics, right? But again, I don't know. I see the messaging on Social Security more in Republican media or from Republican House figures like McCarthy or other ones like that, and not from Senate candidates. I really don't see it talked about much in Senate campaigns on either side. And my assumption there is that Democrats haven't found it that strong of a message, maybe because it's hard to communicate, right? There are certain issues that theoretically could be very strong for, a party or an ideology to run on, but are much harder to communicate, right? I think that was a big issue for progressives in the past, certainly, is healthcare is the number one issue for a lot of people. Overall, different polls usually suggest it's one of, if not the number one issue. And so certainly it is a winning position to run on universal single payer, on expanding access to healthcare, those sorts of things. but it can be really hard to explain what that means, where you get that from, what your policy is, how it differs from these policies. And it's one of those more complex political issues that I think is, because it's harder to communicate, we often see a lot of campaigns sort of miss the mark, and it's not as effective, or they just don't talk about it beyond a couple slogans. And I don't know. I just kind of feel like that's the same thing I see with Social Security, is that they say they're going to privatize it, or things like that. And Democrats just really haven't found anything beyond they're going to privatize it, take away your Social Security, which obviously, that alone should be enough to scare voters away from voting for older
Yeah,
voters.
right. I mean, it scares me. Social
Yeah.
Security is very important to me.
Yeah.
If they're going to go after Social Security means I'll never vote for any of them.
Yeah.
I don't even consider it. I mean,
Yeah.
they're idiots.
Yeah.
But I don't see the Democrats in the Senate actually using that.
Yeah, unfortunately, no. Unfortunately, they
What's
don't
wrong
really.
with Mass, though? Why doesn't she use that?
I don't know. To be fair, I don't really know. Yeah.
Yeah, she's supposed to be a Harry Reid successor.
Yeah.
So why doesn't she use that if she's a Harry Reid successor?
Yeah.
I mean, Harry Reid won't have any problem with that.
Yeah. Well, yeah.
Yes, of course, he's not there anymore, but okay. So, okay, it hangs on a few races, but it's very likely to be 50-50 again.
Yeah, or 51.
Politics,
Either way.
the politics will therefore be similar, except for the fact that Sinema and Joe Manchin have to stand for election in 2024.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a difference.
Mm-hmm.
It's a difference which could make a difference, but depending on whether they want to stay in the Senate or not. And there's been a lot of talk that neither of them would really like to stay in the Senate.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Is there anything else to note in covering the big picture of the Senate, other than what we've talked about?
I mean, not really. I think right now it's still another week or two of really checking on. Right, next week we're going to see the financials. We're going to see what campaigns are doing, how they're doing. That matters a lot more in the House, I'd say. As we saw, money certainly didn't translate to wins in the Senate in 2020. 2020. But I think just right now the Senate campaigns are really looking for what's going to be the messaging in the end. Like Herschel Walker knows what keep saying Walker. Warnock really knows what his messaging is right now. That Georgia doesn't deserve somebody like Herschel Walker, who does not care about them, who lies to them, who deceives them, who is not a family's value type.
Yeah, right. And who doesn't know anything to boot.
Yeah, exactly. And so I think we're going to see sort of more scandals. We're going to see campaigns really hone in their messaging a bit going into the final weeks in the Senate. And I think that's why the Senate races are becoming less competitive, or some of them, like Pennsylvania and Georgia, seem to be becoming less competitive, just because Democratic campaigns in particular, are getting stronger messaging. Yeah, I don't know. I don't want to be too redundant, but I think that's sort of what we're looking for.
Okay, so at the Senate level, again, in terms of the big picture, is there a serious funding advantage for the Republicans who are running in the Senate compared to the Democrats, or have the Democrats been able to maintain pretty good fundraising?
I'm not sure. Democrats outraised the GOP in the House by quite a bit, I think, between the DCCC and the House Majority PAC. I don't actually know if the DSCC has released their monthly reports. I haven't seen much about Senate in terms of fundraising. And then it varies race to race. Some of the candidates certainly have better fundraising than others. Like some of the races, Democrats are much better fundraised, like in Arizona, right? But I'm pretty sure the fundraising in Nevada for the governor's race and the Senate race, I think Republicans have a pretty decent fundraising advantage. Where New Hampshire, Maggie Hassan just blows the GOP out of the water in that race. So I don't know if there's any real uniform message across the country in terms of which party's outraising the other. But ultimately, I'm not sure it matters that much in the Senate.
Okay, good. Okay, my disposition is to say let's go to the House. I know we can't finish the House tonight, but let's sort of start.
Yeah.
Okay.
I will start with one thing. Apparently, the DSCC. So I looked up. I was trying to find whether their numbers came out, and I'm not seeing anything. But they are spending. It doesn't say how much. On a bunch of ad blitzes in all the swing states on Social Security. That came out today. So TV ads in favor of Social Security, attacking the Republican candidates for wanting to cut Social Security and Medicaid.
Oh, so I'm glad to see that they're doing
Yeah.
ad buys for that issue.
Yeah, that'd be good.
Yeah,
And certainly that's an issue, demographic that sort of Democrats lose to Republicans a bit.
right, which they have no business losing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Overall in the House, right, as I mentioned, I think the DCCC is raising more but not spending more. I could be wrong about that. From what we're seeing in spending, though, Republicans have spent, I think, 20 million more in House races than Democrats have. In the 60 or whatever most competitive races, and at least independent expenditures. Campaigns haven't put out their numbers yet, right? And Republicans hold advantage in the overwhelming majority of these races as far as fundraising goes. That could all change now that the DCCC has money if they spend it well. A lot of that, I think, is going to depend. There's a lot of issues with Sean Patrick Maloney, and a lot of people sort of complaining that he's the head of the DCCC and
Oh,
he's
yes, I know.
focused on his own electoral strength. Pushing Mondaire Jones out of his district so that he could have a safer reelection, I think, is disgraceful and certainly should have given.
Yes, it was disgraceful, and it probably cost the party a seat because he probably would have won in his old district, and Mondaire would have won too.
Mm-hmm.
And so, and it probably also affected the district that Mondaire went to, because Goldman might not have won if Mondaire wasn't in the race.
Yeah, well, I certainly don't think it would have, right? Yeah. I would know of I want to say it was the 60 most competitive races, Democrats, both the House Majority PAC and DCCC, spent $0 in like 10 of them, but 10 of them, to be fair, or not 10 of them, but half of them were races like Youngkin's race in California or other incumbents like in Iowa with Miller Meeks races where they really didn't need to be spending anything anyway. But the numbers came out and basically showed, I couldn't find any official numbers on Oregon 05, but I don't think they funded anything in that race either, right? They funded nothing for Michelle Vallejo for Katie Porter, though Katie Porter doesn't really need it. I don't think her race is going to be that competitive, and she is probably the best fundraising, certainly grassroots fundraising of any Democrat in the House, right? She raises consistently something like over $1 million or several million every quarter, and almost the entirety of it, except that, less than 50,000, I want to say, comes from individual donations, most of which are small donations, right? So I'm not really worried about her, but right, Jamie McLeod Skinner and Michelle Vallejo basically get nothing from the party. So Jamie's gotten nothing from the House Majority PAC, and Michelle's gotten nothing from either of the PACs.
But how is their fundraising going apart from that?
Well, we don't know yet. Michelle's been pretty good fundraising, and so is Jamie. So I expect that to be the case now. The biggest concern is just that these are swing districts that I want to say, well, Jamie's race shouldn't really be that much of a swing district, right? It should be lean Democrat, and it shouldn't be that big of a worry. But Republicans maintain like a $1.4 million spending in independent expenditures, an advantage of that much in this race, because Democrats just aren't properly focused in this race. And then you can say the same for Michelle Vallejo's race in Texas's 15th district, where Republicans currently have a 2.4 million, which is just absurd in a swing state that Democrats hold with one of the strongest swing district candidates that the party could ask for. And I don't know, it's kind of embarrassing that the Democratic Party is spending nothing in some of these races while spending, a couple million in races like Illinois 17th district or other races like that at the end of the day are probably just going to be going to Republicans. And it's kind of, I don't know, it's kind of weird for the party to be spending that much in them.
Who's running in the Illinois 17th?
It's a race between, so it's an open seat is the one that Democrats gerrymandered. Actually, no, 17th was Sherry Bustos' district, the former head of the DCCC. And then it opened up because she retired or whatever, but it's a swing district with Eric Sorensen. He's a pretty establishment type of candidate. So not that interesting of a race, but it's a race that certainly if you're investing in swing house districts, it's a race to look at, but it's probably one of the last ones you want to do just because they're like much more competitive races, but Democrats have just shown that they can raise better money, poll better, and things like that. So it's weird that the parties put, how much did I say again in that race? Several million in that, right? One. 2 million in that, and have a fundraising advantage in that, which they don't even have in most districts. But they are putting nothing in Michelle's race, which is just weird to me and to a lot of people, actually, a lot of organizers, a lot of political figures sort of called out the party on this. And I think it needs to be said that if Democrats do lose the House, it's because they weren't investing in candidates that they should have been investing in. And that was the same thing, right, in 2020, where, we had Julie Oliver, Mike Siegel, and Donna Iman, who were very strong, three very strong progressive candidates, Cara Eastman in Nebraska.
Yeah, right. And they got no money from the.
They got nothing. Kaysam Rashid in Virginia was a good example too, right? 5 very strong swing district progressive candidates that didn't get any money from the party, and because of that, they really just weren't able to win, especially with the national environment and Democrats overall doing worse in the House.
Okay, so I think this is a good stopping place. It's roughly 9:55. Let's take a look at some of the comments, okay, that we've gotten. Okay, in closing.
Kay just asked what I thought about the race in Texas. I think Beto is doing better at sort of facilitating down ballot races. He's getting a lot more active in races like Michelle Vallejo's. And I think that's good. I think it's just going to be like his last campaign for governor or Senate. I don't think Democrats can win statewide in Texas without that being one of the focuses of their year and without doing more to sort of change the environment in Texas. And if you have a bunch more competitive Senate and House races and you're worried about the fact that you might lose those chambers of Congress and get, gridlocked for the next 2 years, you're probably not focusing nearly as much in governor races, especially in ones like that where you could be focused in Michigan and Minnesota and Wisconsin or Nevada, Arizona, that have very competitive governor races.
Okay, good point. Kay said we have a big 50-plus voter base here in Ohio. If the GOP wins, many of us will be really pissed. So what does she mean by a big 50-plus?
Like older voters. And
older voters.
Yeah, I think certainly Tim Ryan has more appeal. I mean, Tim Ryan probably not that he's the most appealing guy or charismatic, but he probably has more appeal to both younger voters and like the really younger voters and the much older voters than JD Vance. Just he's hard working class American, energetic, so that appeals to younger people. He's good on sort of older policies in sort of the older framework. JD Vance, I don't know, it doesn't sound like he has that many policies that do that well for older voters, right? Doesn't support Social Security. He's all focused about the future of the Republican Party and as like stopping woke leftists from all the weird Republican dog
Yeah,
whistle.
from a senior point of view, J.D. Vance strikes me as a terrible candidate.
Yeah, I don't really see what appeal he has to senior voters. But... Oh yeah. Also, another comment: if I were to donate, it'd be to candidates. Certainly, always donate to candidates. Don't donate to these PACs. There's one last election cycle that got like a couple $1 million, right, in grassroots donations, and they gave like 0.3% of it to Democratic candidates, and the rest just went to their consultants and things like that. These PACs, most of them are legal scams. I don't know, things like that. If you want to support the candidates, donate to the campaigns. Don't donate to the spending.
Yes, I entirely agree with that. I never give any money to the DCCC. I never give any money to party committees, of any kind.
Mm-hmm.
If I'm giving money to anybody, it's always me making the choice based on the characteristics, of that particular candidate.
Yep.
Okay. In fact, I really resent the party committees. Like, of course, I got a fundraising note from Nancy Pelosi today, just begging for money. We need $113 million to keep our people safe. And my first reaction to that is, hey, Nancy, you've got $113 million and you'd still have another 50 million left over. So why don't you just fund it yourself and leave me alone? I mean, she really has some nerve. Some of them have some nerve with all the money they have.
Mm-hmm.
Saying, oh, we need money.
Mm-hmm.
We need money from people we vote to screw all the time.
Exactly.
Okay, let's see. Other comments? Lana says the recovery is much better with stroke if it's caught early. Needing an aid that doesn't make him unfit for office. I despise how the talking heads approach this. Yeah, so do I. What I focused on the other day in the program we had on John Fetterman was that there was no evidence that his decision-making capacity had been impaired by the stroke at all. Okay, so until they have some evidence about that, I just don't really pay them any mind.
Yeah. Oh, and honestly, he's recovering from the stroke, right? I think a lot of people were looking forward to a debate or whatever, if it happens. I can't remember if it is. But he had a forum where he showed up after the stroke and everything, and he did really well. And I think that one was without QR codes or a teleprompter. I could be wrong on that, though. But anyway, the point is he did really well at it, and Dr. Oz didn't even show up.
But he made an announcement, though, today that it was official. He was going to be debating Dr. Oz.
Yeah, that's what I thought. Okay.
I didn't have, the date. Okay, I didn't see the exact date. I previously remembered something about October 28th, but that was based on some older talk. I don't know if that's going to be the date, or not. But he did make a rather strong announcement. It's official. Okay, I'll be debating. I suspect he'll do very well when he gets into a debate with Dr. Oz.
Yeah, he did. No, I guess it was just him. He did an interview with the NBC yesterday. I guess he raised $1 million after that. Just being
Yes, I heard that too. I
nice.
was very glad to hear that as well.
Yeah. Yeah, so the debate's the 25th, according to the interview.
Okay.
That'd be cool.
So Beamworthy said values and viewpoint and position and policy. Yeah, but what is their plan? Are they sure they will no matter what? I don't care about the personality. I care about the method. Well, it's true. Nobody talks about the method. And I agree the method, okay, is very, very important.
Yeah, just a fish, or unfortunately, rather, a lot of um, politics is in these vibes of how politicians make us feel or whether they're connectable, and or at least at the moment, right, at this point in the election season, the messaging seems to just sort of be about that and like attacking others characters and stuff, and instead of policy, which always gets lost after the primaries especially.
Yeah, but I think that what Beamworthy is pointing out is that she doesn't know. I think Beamworthy is a she, but okay, uh, um, uh, um, if you're a he, I apologize. Okay, I think what you're saying is we don't know the method the candidates will use to have influence in order to get the policies they
Oh, yeah.
advocate for actually passed. Okay, I think it's important for them to say some words concerning the method, but they're kind of constrained in the methods that they're going to use because if they're new congressmen or new senators, they go into an infrastructure which is established and the rules are pretty clear in terms of what they have to do with
Mhm.
deal with, in order to deal with that kind okay, of infrastructure. They don't have too many ways they can go. For them, it's a matter of waiting around for a while to see if they can move their own agenda forward.
Mhm.
And I think that some people, can garner more attention because of their personality. The the glamour factor. But AOC, of course, is an example, okay, of that. But that hasn't really gotten her the committee spots, and it really hasn't uh, um, gotten her the legislation that she wants. It's probably very true that no matter what she did as a young congressperson, uh, she would not have been successful in moving her policies forward, given the kinds of policies she favors, which were not in the center of the Democratic Party, of course,
Mhm.
in the House. So I'd like to see a discussion, okay, of method just to try to elicit some creativity from the candidates, see if they could come up, with any new ideas about how to rock the system. But on the other hand, I don't see too many ways that that can go. So CC Swift says the Lincoln Project is supporting Demings over Marco. Have you seen that?
They're always, it's just like Lincoln Project's just like Republicans rebranding themselves. So if there's a true Trumpian candidate like Marco Rubio, even though he's not really Trumpian, but he's increasingly out there on the right, they
Yeah.
just sort of, if they see an opportunity to grift, they just kind of do. And honestly, they probably picked that race because they know it's not going to actually help a Democrat win, and they're just doing it for a grift. So one of those organizations to never donate to. But
Yeah.
Certainly, but you'd be surprised.
Yes, I certainly agree with that. Okay, so let's call it a night for this. Come back again next Thursday.
Yeah.
And I think our discussion of the house is going to be a very, very extensive, okay, an interesting one. And we'll
Mhm.
have more information about how things are going, okay, in a week, I
Yeah.
think, right? Because we'll have more information on the fundraising.
Yeah, the fundraising should be coming out over the next several days, half a week. Actually, we should probably have most of it by the weekend. Um, right? So I had,
Right. There's one other thing, okay, I want to talk about, Ezra. This is, really has to do with the two of us. Specifically, there, okay, are going to be other programs
Mhm.
during the week, but other than on the Thursday night,
Mhm.
which may be focused on uh, the issue of dumping, the corruption. I,
Mhm.
ex- I expect that those kinds of programs, okay, are going to arise. Uh, could you be available, okay, at any other time?
Yeah, we'll see. My work schedule is different. It's probably something we can talk about off camera and stuff. But yeah, we'll figure out.
Okay, so let's kind of keep in touch with that.
Yep.
Okay, and then uh, if some issues arise uh, for shorter programs during the week. In other
Mhm.
words, I'm doing now, many more 20-minute programs, half-hour programs. So there might be, a lot of other opportunities to have a conversation about these the kinds of issues.
Mhm.
Okay, so it would be good if I knew your schedule.
Okay, yeah, I can get that in touch with you.
Okay, that'd be great. Okay, everybody. I think that's all for tonight. Thank you very much for coming. And we hope to see you again. There are going to be a lot of streams, some streaming tomorrow, and there are going to be a lot of streams next week. We'll be doing at least 3 streams a day now.
Wonderful.
So keep up with us, please. So thank you again very much for coming.
Yep.
Okay, and good night.
Good night, everyone.